Hello everyone, we are today doing our final video in the verbal section, and we are at this point just left with a final section, which is critical reasoning. We spoke a little earlier about reading comprehension. So we talked about the fact that comprehensions, the books that you have been given, Princeton Review, it distinguishes between two sets of comprehensions. One is reading comprehension and the other is critical reasoning. Critical reasoning is a little different from reading comprehension. How it is different, how do we distinguish between the two, and what are the processes via which we are going to attempt these questions, that is what I am going to talk about in this video. Please remember, this video is simply a brief overview of things that I have already talked about in our sessions. This in no way covers for the sessions themselves, because in the sessions I have a lot more time, I talk about things in great detail. This is simply to ensure some basic level of instructions that at times you are not writing down, so that you have those with you when you are revising. So coming back to critical reasoning, the first thing we need to understand is how to distinguish a critical reasoning passage from a reading comprehension passage. Now, first of all, you will never have a long critical reasoning passage. It is always a short passage. So the question is, how does one distinguish from a short reading comprehension passage and a short critical reasoning passage? First things first, I think if you look at the length, critical reasoning passages are, generally speaking, even shorter than the ones in reading comprehension. The other thing which can easily give it away is they are not as densely written, they are not as difficult to read, and they generally have an argumentative structure, because that is what the question is about. This exercise is to check or to gauge your reasoning power, and that's how the passage is written. It is not densely written. You would not find that very many adjectives, you won't find that very many complicated ways of talking about things. There generally would be a single argument, and that argument will continue throughout the passage. The other giveaway is the type of questions that you see in critical reasoning. So you would never be asked in critical reasoning to pick a particular sentence or a word from the passage. You would not be asked to make multiple choices. This allows you to easily distinguish between a reading comprehension passage and a critical reasoning passage. And once you have distinguished between a reading comprehension and critical reasoning passage, the other thing that you need to know is how we approach them. Our approach to critical reasoning is a little different, because the question is looking for or trying to test a particular skill. So whenever you are reading a critical reasoning passage, what you have to do is, again, what we used to do in reading comprehension as well, is that we simplified the passage. But here, far more than detail, the question is going to be about the overall structure of the passage. The question would be, as I've talked about earlier, either what particular sentences are doing in the passage, or what a particular argument, which, to be very fair, would not be mentioned exactly in the passage, but is somehow implied by the passage, how that particular argument, the question would ask, affects a particular conclusion. Again, this conclusion itself would not be in the passage. That is what distinguishes a critical reasoning passage from a reading comprehension passage. If you were looking for a definition, reading comprehension, even though it requires you to use your brain and it requires you to look at assumptions and premises and conclusions, you still have to look at the information given in the passage. Critical reasoning is far more removed. Even the options that you are going to see are going to be far beyond the scope of the text. There is some logical connection that you have to infer, and based on that you have to answer these questions. Now, the one instruction that everyone needs to be very careful about is, and this is the mistake that ATS has told us about, students usually make, is whenever you are reading a critical reasoning question, always read the final question very carefully. The line where it mentions what sort of question it is, because as I've already told you, there are 3 to 4 modes of questions that you could be given in critical reasoning. What students usually do, because they practice over and over again, they get into the habit of not reading the final line carefully, because they are always looking to save time. This is something which will run you into trouble. If you have to be very careful reading the last line, because in the very last line, he will tell you very exactly what you are supposed to do. So even if you understood the passage and you have deconstructed it well enough, but if you still have failed to understand what the question is specifically talking about or asking for, it would be very difficult to apply the process of elimination, which is how we solve this question.